So to recap, Dan Harmon's story circle is a hero with 1,000 faces without phrenology.
The so-called story circle is my attempt to remove all of the hard and repeated work from the task of breaking a story.
This week on the Super Secret Podcast, class is in session as we talk in circles, story circles that is. We're going to be going over Dan Harmon's story circle. Welcome back to the Super Secret Podcast, Secret Keepers, a show where we take a deep dive into a topic of interest and then we come up with a game to pitch to you. I am your host, glad to have 2023 behind me, Joel Watts, aka the Joel Watts on socials, joined as always by
Danny. Just looking forward to the rest of 2024, I guess. I don't know. I got caught blindsided by that one, which is weird since we do that every single episode.
Yeah, I've been caught blindsided. I think I've made up the question of the week a few times, like on the spot. Well, last week we got into what? Sorry. Last week we got into. Okay, I worded this so wrong. Cat takes. Winston, why did you do this? Why did you write the script like this? Okay. Last week, we went over the trends of 2023 according to Google. So if you want to know how we turned the foreseeable OceanGate catastrophe into a game, you will have to find that episode where we host them on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or our personal favorite platform, YouTube. Because at the end of the day, this is a video show first and foremost. While you're checking into our library of episodes, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends who like deep dives and gaming vibes. Today, we're going to talk to you about the best tool for structuring the stories you want to tell, the story circle, as formalized by phenomenal Dan Harmon, whose accomplishments of creating and show running both Community and Rick and Morty should speak to itself. But before we go deep diving into that rabbit hole, let's answer the question of the week.
So because we are recording 2 episodes back to back today for, scheduling reasons, I have, both questions. So you can choose which question is going to make the most sense for this episode. I'm going to tell you one is game related, one is film related.
Next week's episode is going to really focus in on gaming. So let's stick with film today.
Okay. So the question of the week is, what is one movie that doesn't have a sequel that you wish did? What would you want it to cover? What is one movie that doesn't have a sequel that you wish did, and what would you want that sequel to cover?
That is a great question, Danny, because it's often we bemoan, especially it's not nearly the trope it used to be that you would bemoan that a movie is getting a sequel because
they all have sequels.
Basically there's no such thing as a non-sequel movie at this point. But it used to be like, so can I have a little bit, I'm going to do a little tangent on sequels. The problem with sequels is they always want to reset the status quo and make the same movie again, but different. And that really hinders certain movies like Men in Black specifically. The sequels stink because they always want to take Will Smith's character and take all his experience away and to put Tommy Lee Jones back above him as his mentor figure / critic. And it doesn't allow the character to progress. And you see this time and time again with sequels. I want to say Kingsman, the sequel to that one, really upset me because it basically went through and through to reset the status quo, even though the character had been killed. The mentor character had been killed in the first movie, and they brought him back. So I was out on that one. Now, a movie that could have had a sequel that hasn't is really, really tough because, maybe I should ask if you already have an answer ready because I might need time to think.
No, I don't.
Wow, you're very ballsy. I have an excuse.
Yeah. So this could be a time lapse where Will speeds it up so that we seem more capable of answering this question.
Or just put us at 0.5 while we think things out loud, or not 0.5, not slower. I mean twice. It's double speed.
Great.
So
now we're super slow during that section because Will does everything we say literally.
Yes.
Okay. Sequels that I wish we got a second little window into. Well, here's the problem: is like I kind of feel like I'm gonna pitch something that does have a sequel, and I just don't know it.
Yeah, that's another thing I was very afraid of. So I was letting you take the landmine.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess maybe Apocalypse Now, maybe Apocalypse Then. No, I'm grasping for straws here.
Yeah.
No. Little Miss Sunshine, the funeral, or did they cover the funeral in the story?
They didn't really cover the funeral necessarily, but they definitely. So I mean, you might got something there. But yeah, they kind of dealt with the grief, I guess you could say.
Yeah, not Fast and the Furious, because obvious reasons.
I do have an answer now.
Okay, you go.
Okay, so I imagine when this movie was initially made, it made a star out of both the actress and the director, and I think that it would be a great for in maybe 30 years, maybe less, with some aging makeup, they return together to like tell the other side of the story. The Witch. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, a little. I mean, it's like one of those things. If I pause the movie 5 minutes in, you could probably tell me what's going to happen by the end. But I'll go ahead and say spoiler warning. Skip ahead if you don't want to have the witch spoiled for you. But at the end of the movie, the young woman who has been terrorized the entire time, this young teenage girl, finally makes a pact with Satan himself to become a witch herself, and she joins a coven. So I think it would be great for Anya Taylor-Joy, the woman who played the witch, and Robert Eggers to re-team to tell like the story from the other perspective, her being the witch, and you seeing more of the story through the witch's perspective, haunting or tormenting a new family, maybe even being caught and going through the trials. Just put a little bow on it, especially once she's like in her maybe 50s or so, 60s. That would be very interesting way to cap off her career or tie up that knot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to do a sequel in a lot of ways is like tell the next chapter of the character's life. Don't just, like you said, find a way to do the first movie over again as closely as possible.
Yeah.
I think that's what Hollywood's afraid of. It's like they're making sequels for the wrong reason. They're making sequels because they want those box office dollars, and they're afraid that if the movie isn't exactly like the first movie, it's not going to get the box office dollars. So oftentimes studios are really, really hesitant to pursue like a actual novel premise for the second movie. And audiences don't want to just see the same thing retread. They want to see the next installment.
Yeah.
I think there's like a thing with superhero movies at this point where I think people are like almost over the classic origin story. It's like, how many times do we need to see Spider-Man get bit by a spider?
Or Uncle Ben die is what the big thing that you
Batman's parents get capped in an alley.
Yeah. You like kudos to the Batman for not explicitly showing that scene, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I don't think that they did, but they may have, but I don't think it was. I don't remember.
It was kind of a trade-off because it was like the first movie that really dealt with his parents as characters, as people. So I guess the trade-off was you don't see him die, but they're kind of haunting the entire movie.
Yeah, which I think is acceptable. I mean, like if you're going to do something like that, do it differently. Yeah, I don't know that I have a great answer to this question because I forgot to think about it.
Fantastic move.
Yeah. But
can I just pause it? Maybe like another answer for you, or
sure, you answer and I'll tell you why it should be a sequel.
Okay. So just the movie Good Time came to mind, and that movie ends yet again. Spoilers for Good Time if you haven't seen it, but with
I have not.
Robert Pattinson's character finally giving himself up to the cops, if you will. I mean, technically he full blown gets arrested, but you can tell that he's going to take through the plot. His brother's in a lot of trouble because of something he did, and you can tell at the end he's about to confess to everything. So his brother gets off, and he's just going to spend the time. He's going to do the prison sentence. I think that with how interesting that character is and how creative he is, you could have a sequel set at the jail where he is trying to become, he's trying to run a scheme in prison. I just think that would be fascinating to see that character operating in that different context, being a caged creature, trying to make the best of his situation. Maybe it could be a prison escape movie. He does have that energy, but it could just be as much as like he just wants to be the top dog and, the top man you go to for, the drugs in the prison, and he's trying to bump out his competition, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, okay, I don't know what this would cover, but I wouldn't mind seeing another. Never mind. Again, I don't remember all the movies clearly enough, and sometimes I just had this idea, and then I was like, well, did that character die at the end of that movie?
Well, tell me.
Django? Did Django die?
No, Django was alive.
Then another Django.
Hell yeah.
I'd be into that, just to completely, not that I think Tarantino would do that or I would want anyone else to do it, but that's a character I would love to see, like, what's next for them.
Yeah, I think that would be a great answer. Like, whether it just be the life of in freedom or him going back and getting some more revenge.
I really don't think we're going to get this episode landed at the time that we need to at this point, so I'm going to pass it to you for the main topic.
Well, Danny, before we do that, let's remind the folks. Well, folks, that is our take on the question of the week. But what do you think? Tell us in one of the following ways. The best ways for us to this is what happens when you reformat a show, folks. You gotta do multiple takes. All right. Well, folks, that is our take on the question of the week. But what do you think? Tell us one of the following ways. The best ways for us to see your answers are as follows. 1, leave your answer in a comment on YouTube on this video. Start the comment with question of the week or QOT, and we'll spot it amongst all the other comments. So many comments there on YouTube. Second is make a TikTok of your answer and at Megamoth Studios in the description, and Danny will see it, and we'll maybe even play it on big screen.
Yep.
Finally, well, I can't call it big screen because big screen's taken by after midnight, so I guess I'll have to call this one tiny screen or small screen.
Medium screen.
Medium screen? What's up, buddy? You're good. You're medium. And finally, leave your answer as the text in your review on Apple Podcast and rate us 5 out of 5, and we will definitely read your answer on the next episode after we've seen it. You might want to reiterate the question at that point because we might not see it for many episodes to come. Anyways, so we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the story circle.
This week, we want to tell you about a brand new game coming to Kickstarter on September 10th called Pantheon. It's a new strategy game from Archwood Games. In it, you play a demigod competing against your siblings for the control of the creation of a brand new world. It is a very fun game with secret agendas and a lot of back and forth. Check it out on Kickstarter September 10th.
Now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Super Secret Podcast. We are now ready to dive into the story circle. So in 2002, Dan Harmon founded Channel 101, a monthly screening of web series and short films for the young and unfound talent of Los Angeles to gather and grow their craft. Dan soon found that there was a recurring problem amongst some of the funniest and most talented writers in this stage of their development. They did not know how to tell a story. Can you blame them? It seems so mythical, so formal, so grand. You can stand on a stage and tell a joke in moments and know that it's good or bad, but a narrative takes time to craft, and you can only know what you have when it's finished. A very scary process to start. So Dan had already done his homework, and he knew the hero's journey as outlined by Joseph Campbell's seminal work, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. But he could not just recommend all these comedians read this work of academic anthropology. It isn't for everyone. So Dan set to separating the core humanity of story structure. I'm going to retake that line. So Dan set to separating the core of This is
the core humanity of story structure?
Yeah, of story structure. So Dan set to separating out from Joseph Campbell's work the core humanity of story structuring.
What does that mean?
That means, well, we talked about this off mic, but basically, in my opinion, let's compare it to Sigmund Freud.
Okay.
A lot of people say that Sigmund Freud was a hack because they read his work not that they read his work, but because they know him from his work that didn't transcend. Like most of his work was so important that it just transcended into everybody else's work, and it just became common knowledge in psychology. And so all that remained was his more out there, outlandish, thoughts, ideas, theories that he just threw out. So my feeling is that what Dan Harmon did was he took all the core most important bare bones ideas from Joseph Campbell and left behind all of the art, anthropology, all the old world thinking, all the academia. And so when people look back at Joseph Campbell, they're just going to really see all the more wild or mythical ideas he put out there, versus Dan Harmon's is just going to seem like very cut and dry. In fact, I can get into it a little.
So to recap,
yes,
Dan Harmon's story circle is a hero with 1,000 faces without phrenology.
I'm pretty sure he didn't quite hit that. He did have some sexism. People do criticize him of. We can do an entire episode on what was left behind by Joseph Campbell, and maybe so you could try to pick at the scraps or go back and do even more traditional storytelling. But we're just going to stick with this more truncated or what is it? Aerodynamic. What I'm looking for a word here.
I don't know, but it sounds like you've distilled it to its core components.
Yeah. So Dan had a really great quote here. Storytelling comes naturally to humans, but since we live in an unnatural world, we sometimes need a little help doing what we'd naturally do. Sorry, I just want to check the levels out of the corner of my eye. So that's how he introduced the Story Circle on his Channel 101 blog, which I would highly recommend reading after finishing this episode, even for more insight into the Story Circle. You can find that at Channel 101. Just type in Google Dan Harmon Story Circle Channel 101.
What do you think he meant by storytelling comes naturally to humans, but the problem is like the world we live in is no longer natural, is unnatural? That's a really interesting idea.
I think he means we can get more into it, and I think it'll somewhat become clear as I get more into the details, but I think the high concept is we're almost so educated and we've learned so thoroughly how to deconstruct things that I think we've lost some of that just natural capability, and it's sort of been obfuscated by being more learned. That would be my guess. And just, we don't do the things that humans need to do to survive in the same way that they did for thousands of years.
Is it that we have a more scientific understanding of the world, so we're less inclined to make up stories for why things are?
That could be part of it. And I think also we don't necessarily do things. This is potentially a side tangent, but it used to be that you would have to, in order to go hunt, you would need to tell yourself the story of the hunt. You would have to go out and do the hunt, and then you'd have to tell so you'd almost have to prepare with a story, and then when you got back, you had a story to tell. And so it's almost like that preparedness, that ingraining it, because then you need to not only are people telling you stories about the hunt as you grow up, but then you have to be the one to tell the stories of the hunt to the people coming up behind you so they can go and hunt.
I don't want to get too far afield here, but that brings up an interesting idea, which is maybe we started losing our way when we started writing things down, in the sense that pre-written word, if you wanted to relay a piece of information, you had to do it orally. Yeah. And so to get people to listen to you, you kind of had to perfect the craft of telling that story in the most interesting way. Yeah,
that very well could be it. And I think most stories should be, I'll say, well, I don't want to get too off topic, but I do want to say, if for everybody at home, if you can't pitch your story verbally, if you can't walk somebody through your entire story verbally, standing up face to face, you don't have a story. You might as well not even write a screenplay until you can sit across from somebody and tell them your entire story. So that is, so the circle is divided into 8 slices. Hopefully we'll get some graphics up here. So like a delicious Domino's pizza. The first 2 cuts divide the story into 2 different halves. The horizontal cut from left to right represents the division in our hero's world that they travel through. The top half of the world that the hero knows when he's the top half of the world is the world that the hero knows when he starts the story, and the bottom half represents the world that the hero has to travel into to find what they are looking for. Dan classifies this divide into 3 rhythms on his blog. The rhythm of biology, which he classifies as life, and death, the rhythm of psychology, which he classifies as consciousness and unconsciousness, and the rhythm of society, which he classifies as order and chaos. Sort of like, that classic, there's three stories: man versus nature, man versus man versus himself, or what have you.
Yeah.
Similar to that. And I wanted to include that because we are often going to be talking about this circle in a reductive terms that make it sound like it's that every story needs to be an adventure with people leaving home and going to foreign lands. But that is a misconception of the simplicity. This is an abstract concept that can apply to a story that takes place in a single room or in the mind of a bedridden hospice patient. The vertical cut from the top to the bottom represents the half of the story where the hero is who they started as, using the skills they already knew, while the second half represents who the hero becomes on their journey, using the skills that they have learned along the way to come back up.
So, like, in one sense, we could talk about the quadrants as familiar place, old person, new place, old person, new place, new person, old place, new person.
Damn, I think you just took the next paragraph out of my thing. Yes, that was well said, Danny, and you're already picking up on the concept really clearly. But we can also, now we need to get a little more granular to help writers keep momentum and keep a good pace to set for their story. So we're going to add 2 diagonal slices, creating an X on the top of the cross that we already have. This gives us 8 pieces or 8 slices of the story. Each of these slices now has a single word to go with it. Let's start at 1. You need, go, search, find, take, return, change.
So there's now 8 total slices, and each of those words maps onto one of the 8 slices?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Technically, it maps onto the cut of the slice, but, so like think of like that as like,
the transitions.
The transitions. Yeah, the cuts are like the transitions. Dan says in his blog post, I think this really was one of the things that convinced me that he was writing at a higher level of consciousness, so I wanted to read this all. And so it's going to be a chunky quote, but just give me a second. Sounds like a caveman giving you an order. That's what it is. Behind and beneath your culture creating forebrain, there is an older, simpler monkey brain with a lot less to say and a much louder voice. One of the few things it's telling you over and over again is that you need to go search, find, take, and return with change. Why? Because that is how the human animal has kept from going extinct. It's how human societies keep from collapsing and how you keep from walking into McDonald's with a machine gun. If you were hired to write a script for a race of super evolved spiders, you might find that they prefer a more linear model, and that the spider version of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack might build his own beanstalk, find a sandwich at the top of it, eat some of it, and save some for later. The end. That's not really inspiring to us. We like some circles. We like big ones. We like little ones. And given the choice, we'll take a shitty one over a lack of one. But unless you're writing for some other species, it will pay for you to keep things fairly rounded. Jack goes up the beanstalk. Jack finds some cool shit. Jack steals it. Jack runs back down, and Jack gives it to his mom. We need go search. We need get fire. We need good woman. We need land moon. But most importantly, we need return. We need change, because we are a community, and if our heroes just climbed the beanstalks and never came down, we wouldn't have survived the first ice age. So now we have the slices laid out and the reasons for them. Wait. Actually, no. This is not the quote. I'm actually going to why don't you react to the quote? I shouldn't jump in the next section.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that you see all the time when something doesn't resonate with you from a story standpoint is what changed. The character's the same, the situation's the same. I think when people first start out telling stories, and this is something I think we can get to later with games, because I think this matters a lot with games, is you feel like the character that started the story is the character that ended the story, and you're just kind of watching them move through life. They may not even be particularly active. You're just along for the ride. It seems like we're watching scenes from their life taken at random. And what the story circle points out is that the core essence of the struggle to survive for humans is the ability to constantly pursue change and constantly return different, having sought a new adaptation to their way of life. And that resonates with us when we see it in stories, and it turns us off when we don't see it in stories. And I think we've kind of talked about this in games, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more later. If you don't feel like you're pursuing change and adaptation throughout a course of a game, you probably aren't feeling like you're taking action or playing the game.
Mm-hmm. If you're not improving also, or gaining new skills that you find along the way. So yeah, I do completely agree with that. I mean, I will say, I'm not an expert on this, but it does feel like there was a bit of we want our characters to be perfect people, perfect people. And I think that's where sometimes we're seeing like no change happening to a character throughout a story, because it's like the mandate is, oh, we don't want a flawed character. And I have no idea where that's coming from necessarily. And it might not be true. It might just be, or it might not be coming from the writers. It might be the executives who are just like, oh, this character is a necrophiliac at the start of the story. We can't have that. That might be a little, that might be a little much. But, oh, this character doesn't care about kids at the start of the story. Oh, that's a bad quality. Why would we have a character with a bad quality? And it's like, well, yeah, but the point is they care about kids at the end of the story. It's like, well, no, but you should just let them care about the kids at the beginning of the story. So it's like, you definitely need, like, this is why you need to have a flawed character, because they need to change. But we're going to get more into that as we get further up this beanstalk of the story circle.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have the slices laid out and the reason for them from a biological and evolutionary perspective, let's look at each slice more specifically. And I will be framing this as a movie narrative, as I believe movies are the most cut and dry, close-ended form of modern storytelling.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to start, just go slice by slice. Danny, the first slice is you. So just to give you a little bit about you, Dan says that you need to establish a protagonist. Pretty cut and dry. This is the most utilitarian and obvious slice. Establish a main character. Your audience needs a character to be with, and your audience needs a character to be with and really to be. Okay, I'm not as good at just cold reading as I thought I was. I put some clever wording in here, and I'm not like reading it well. But essentially, if you don't have anybody to latch onto, because like when you watch a story, you psychologically like basically are putting on the mask of the main character. You are the main character in a lot of ways. Like, let's be honest. And so if you're not with a character, you're not with the story. And some things that Dan suggests is you don't want to go too far into the story without establishing a protagonist. Now, don't get you wrong. You can like bat around a few characters, like introduce a few characters before your protagonist shows up that the audience will latch onto until your protagonist shows up. But highly recommended you don't go more than 25% of your total runtime without hitting your main character. And I do find that it's interesting. I don't want to cite this movie too often. It's too perfect, but Star Wars pretty much meets that limit, because you have C-3PO and R2-D2 for a long stretch before Luke shows up for the first time. And so, just an example, you can hold off on introducing your Luke Skywalker, but you want to give your audience at least 75% of the runtime to be with your Luke Skywalker, and you want to stick with him, through the end of the story. And a great suggestion from Dan, I think you know this one. I think you inherently know this one, is when you feel sorry for someone, you're using the part of your brain that you use to identify with them. So you maybe want to have a character stub their toe as they walk into the scene. And introduce them in an embarrassing moment, or a moment where they feel like, a little bit of pain.
Yep.
So any overall thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think like you think about Indiana Jones, right? Like we see Indy in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's a badass in the beginning, which seems like it runs counter to that. But the culmination of that scene is him being in an airplane with a snake, and we're immediately confronted with his phobia, and we can immediately say like, okay, this guy does have his, his idiosyncrasies. He becomes human in that moment. We can relate to him in that moment. we understand his fear, and we definitely would not want to be in a confined space with a big snake.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, like, yeah, that entire opening, it's almost like pulling him down to us, because not only that, but he loses, like, somebody one ups him, they get the better of him. He doesn't look that heroic as he's running away from those I guess lost tribes people. So I mean, and it culminates with him like being stuck in a airplane with a snake, and this being his biggest fear.
Another example, and then we should move on.
Yeah.
But just briefly, is think back to how we position how Breaking Bad positioned Walter White through the beginning of the first season versus where he ends up.
Yeah.
It's a character that if you just had Heisenberg walk into a room, no one's relating to that character. No one's rooting for that character.
Oh.
It's the fact that we saw his rise from being a pathetic, doormat of a human being.
Yes.
That gave us that connection to him that allows us to go places with him we would never go if we were like introduced to him in that way.
Oh yeah. We had to be super. If anything, we almost felt like a puppy situation, like a miserable puppy for him. Like he was almost beneath us, and we as he rose, he met us, and then he surpassed us for sure.
So
anyway,
next?
So next, number 2, need.
Okay.
Something isn't quite right in their life. So now you need to show the audience the conflict in the story. It has to be it can be an external or internal conflict, of course. If your story is about a bank security guard foiling a robbery, then this would be a good time to show off one of the robbers scoping out the joint and acting very suspiciously. But if your story was about a therapist losing control of their OCD tendencies, this would be when you would have them have to go check the lock 5 times before they finally feel calm enough to relax in their own house. Want is also a good word for this slice, because this is a great time for your character to say, I want. This is so that the audience knows, it is not corny, and every single musical has an entire song dedicated to this, and it is called the I Want song. If you have a really good performer, then they might be able to capture that with just a look, or with that idea with a look. Harrison Ford famously cut a line from a script, or a monologue from the script, that he said he could perform in a single look. But you don't know who you're going to be casting when you're writing the script, so you might as well, at this time, write into the story the character saying, I want blank. In my if I have a short film, it's called Negotiations, and in the first scene, the character establishes who she is. You really much understand who she is. And she says that what she wants, she wants to get laid. She wants to have sex. She says that into a phone to a friend. And
you connect her because she's in a public bathroom and she runs out of toilet paper.
Exactly. That's the connection point too. So I don't remember if I had read this before, like Dan Harmon's. So I'm not just reading Dan Harmon's word for word, but I am definitely taking from it. I don't remember if I had read it before I wrote Negotiations, but in retrospect, it was, I definitely saw like, oh yeah, that is that's great. Any experience with setting up the need of a character, Danny?
Well, I mean, again, if we're looking at Walter White, because I think Walter White's a really iconic character, and this is an interesting point to make about need and want, and which one really is the need and which one is the want. So on some level, Walter's need is to provide for his family after he's gone.
Yeah.
And then and his want is that he wants to redeem his sense of self, that he was more than just a high school chemistry teacher, that he was a great chemist, that he was somebody who was worthy of a Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah. I think that's and I like how they slowly trickle that out, that he didn't start as a high school. He didn't start as a high school teacher. He he fell into it, and like you realize, oh, he was actually working for a big company. Oh, he had patents, that were very important. So yeah, you get that sense like this is not about the money.
And it's interesting because at some point you have to ask yourself, is that person pursuing that need, or are they pursuing that want? Because those things, sometimes they'll tell you why they're doing something and it's not the same as why they're doing it. And I think that's where that rhythm of psychology comes in. Conscious versus unconscious is, I'm consciously trying to protect my family after I'm gone. Subconsciously, I'm trying to redeem my sense of self. I'm trying to reclaim my ego.
And they can be those two different things. You'll follow a protagonist because their want makes sense, and their need can be hidden or obscured, or vice versa. Their need can be like are out there in the for everybody to see, and their want can be a little bit more obscure.
Does Dan Harmon give any sort of guidance about how to differentiate what makes a good need from what makes a good want?
Not really. You'll kind of get a sense of it if you read the entire blog post that I'm pulling from and doing my research. I think that he's a little more. His writing on this is not as direct as you would expect. It's sometimes super direct, but it's not as direct as you would expect. And he kind of, uses these words interchangeably. In fact, I'm the one who put down want, I want to say, versus need.
Is need and want two different words, or is it?
It's the same slice. It's just
same slice.
my preferred. Okay. It's my preferred word for the slice, or the word I would use. Like, because I do not disagree, but I think that there's other words you can use for the slices that might work better for you and your psychology or the story you're telling. Some stories are about need, like Seven Samurai. We need to get guardians here to protect our village.
Right.
That's a need. Versus I'm trying to think of a great want story. It's so funny how it does not populate in my head. Maybe Citizen Kane. Kane wants to have the biggest newspaper. He wants to have a media empire. He doesn't need it. He could walk away. Maybe the thing that's need versus want is the idea of like if you're like the downtrodden versus the overambitious.
I think the need is the thing that drives the character that they may not verbalize, and the want is the thing that they verbalize. And sometimes those could be the same. Yeah. I think it can be. But I think if you really want to play with that character who's a little bit more complex, right? Like the Citizens Kane example, like I want accomplishment, but I need validation.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I want accomplishment because I believe it'll give me validation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to Go, which is also called Crossing the Threshold. So this is where the story really starts. As the table is set, the characters are established, and there is a world, and their world is going to change. This is where the protagonist chooses to, or is forced to, take part in the story, even if it is going to be harrowing. When people tell their friends about your story, these moments are going to be the core in their summation. Dan suggests thinking of the poster to your film. This is where all the elements of the poster would start to be introduced. And most importantly, this is the step that takes us from the top half of our pizza down into the bottom half, crossing from order into chaos, consciousness into unconsciousness.
So going back to Breaking Bad, the perfect vehicle for this is the RV, where they do the first cook.
Yes.
Right? Because that is quite literally how Walt and Jesse start to move into the underworld, because it's the direct result of that cook that leads them to their first sale, which kind of is the point of no return, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like it starts, for sure. And also they go out into the desert to do it.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of thresholds being crossed there. I think it's all says it for itself. Like this is, I think, often the need. So I think the need would be considered the inciting incident. This is probably closer to what you would consider the first act break if you're doing the 3-act structure, So I think that's pretty cut and dry. So we might as well go on to search. So that would be, let me just keep counts. So let's go back up to the top. Since we crossed one of the thresholds, let's remember the first threshold was you, need, and go. So now we're going on to step number 4. The first of the bottom half, past the threshold, is search, or the road of trials. Now that was a phrase that Dan Harmon kept from Joseph Campbell. The road of trials. I think he thought that really sums it up. I personally prefer the word adapt over search, but this is where you throw the protagonist in the deep end and you see if they can sink or swim. And now we get to watch them. So your protagonist will be stripped of false notions, mostly by being punished for holding on to them into this new world that they've fallen into. Basically, the protagonist must start to take the situation at hand a lot more seriously and meet the threat or the conundrum on its terms. And funny enough, I believe this is the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Isn't that acceptance?
Yeah, but you're accepting that you're powerless. So whatever you thought, with Alcoholics Anonymous, it's like saying you thought you could set rules and boundaries to maintain your drinking, and yet you couldn't. You're still here with us, having hit rock bottom. So you have to accept that you are powerless. Whatever you had didn't work. So welcome to the program.
Yep. So, I mean, and again, we just kind of alluded to it with Breaking Bad, sticking with Breaking Bad. This is where they have that first encounter with the guys. They end up having to tie them up and make the decision what to do. You know, he can't quite bring himself to kill him, but through circumstance, that first murder happens and they have to get rid of the body. And now you really know that this isn't just, you know, you go out to the desert and you make some meth and then you bury it in the desert and you come home. That story's over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you go a step further and you kill someone and you're disposing of a body, that's something that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life in some shape or form. And that really is the moment that we know they've plunged into that world of the unknown. We can see that they're on the other side at that point.
100%. That's a great one. And Walter, you know, he wanted to believe that he could do it a different way than what the underworld suggests. You know, he wants to believe. What was his name? It's not 2 Chainz.
Tuco.
No, Tuco's
the boss.
Tuco's the boss, the guy he actually kills.
I have no memory of that. I just know that he was like tied up in the basement and
with a bicycle lock around his neck.
Yeah, and he kind of got to the point where he had convinced him, but then he sees like the glass in his hand or something.
No, so what happened was
he puts the glass back together.
Yeah, he broke a plate in front of the guy because he passed out, and he picks up the shards. He's about to let the guy go, but then he takes the shards and puts them back together and realizes the guy has hold on to one shard. And so instead of letting the guy go, he realizes it's him or this guy. There's no releasing this dude and Walter White surviving. So he realizes he has to kill the man, but he's punished by A, he has to kill somebody for what he's done, and B, he also gets stabbed in the leg with that plate shard. He's not killed, but he does get a wound that he has to treat for the rest of the season.
And that's usually a great thing to have happen as you're starting the road to trials. The road to trials is probably not really a road to trials if it's not leaving its mark on the character physically.
100%. This is when you get your battle scars for sure. But let's move on to what I think is the most important of the circle. In my opinion, you should start writing your story here and bloom it out either side, because this is, like, I believe the most beautiful portion of your story, and that's find. Now we're at the very bottom. This is the character at his lowest point in the story circle. So we have reached the bottom of the circle, and I believe I basically just said everything that I wrote. Anyways, so after the protagonist has been stripped of everything, the protagonist finds something that makes them change their outlook and their approach to the whole situation. Yet again, Dan sums it up so well in this image. Dan, imagine that you are standing on a pier. You see it glimmering through the water and you wonder what it is. Need. While leaning in to see, you fall off the pier. Go. You sink down deeper and deeper. Search. And until you come to the floor of the lake and see what was catching your eyes. It could be a human skull. It could be a necklace. It could be a tiny ancient spacecraft. It could just be a quarter, 25 cents of value. Now, for me, that's like, this is that, it's hard to encapsulate, but it's like that magical moment where you literally find what you were looking for, and it is either everything you needed or it's nothing what you expected. And so it could be good or bad. It could be an object outside of themselves or a feeling or an idea within yourself. But you must remember that the point is directly across from the first slice, you. So at this time, your character has to reflect on who they were and who they've become now, that if they're going to continue on their journey to climb back up. So it's both like the lowest point and it's the point of discovery. So, like, you found the treasure.
Again,
Breaking Bad.
We're going back to Breaking Bad. I would argue that the find moment is, what does Walter White find? He finds the Heisenberg hat. And because we're looking at the end of the first season, right? Mm-hmm. The hat is just a hat. But what it represents is he's found some outlet that feeds his ego, which was that need that we're talking about early in the story. it's the point, it's the representation that Walter White becomes Heisenberg and realizes he's damn good at doing this.
Oh, he's about to, because he's about to get to the take.
Yeah.
Because the take is where you meet your maker. And this is the time to probably bring up Tuco here in a minute, because now we are on our way up. And on your first stop, you come face to face with your own personal father, God, or Satan. And why do you do this? Because you now have their attention. You have become their equal, and they do not like that at all. And they want to show you that you cannot overcome them. This slice is directly across from need. And this is where the protagonist has found what they truly needed, which isn't the same as what they thought they needed, and they are taking it. Remember that this figure doesn't need to be a living being. It could be a concept, but it should probably have a representative in this world that can talk to the protagonist.
So again, if we're looking at the first season, which, of course, in a season of TV, it's going to work differently than in a movie. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Tuco, but in the larger scheme of things in the show, you would probably go for Gustavo Fring.
Yes, probably.
He's what Heisenberg is aspiring to be. He has what Heisenberg wants, and very much the story of Breaking Bad is Heisenberg taking it from Gustavo Fring in a sense.
Yes, 100%. That's who he meets, and that becomes his biggest. For the run of the story, anybody who really is looking at the long view of Breaking Bad, they're going to say Gustavo is the antagonist. He might have come in late, he might have bowed out early, but that was the person that Walter White had to deal with most formidably in order to overcome.
Yeah.
And so it's a basically this, like you thought, and also the hero thought that he had hit every single bump on the way down to get to the bottom, but climbing his way up is jagged rocks, and it's still going to leave marks on their hands. It's like it was not easy for Walter to take on Gustav. But now we're getting to the return. I just want to make sure of something. Oh, that's the other thing. So this is now we're coming back up into the order side, the consciousness. We've left the unconsciousness after we defeat that. So we are crossing through the halfway point. Yeah, coming up to unconsciousness. But just so the thing I want you to think about here is, as the hero was being held back by people in their life already from descending in the first place, say Skylar, who a lot of fans don't like, even though be sane. She's the sanest person in the show. Anyways, that's a whole other rant. But they're being held back by people in their life. Now that they're coming out, the people in the unconscious zone, or the entities in the unconscious zone, they don't want them to leave. They want to either keep them here or they want to eliminate them. So that's kind of the thing about returning here. And this is the opposite of search. So whatever they have found, whatever was found has changed the hero, and now they are the master of both the consciousness and the unconsciousness. The master of both worlds is often used by Dan in describing the story circle. You were the master of one world, you went to another world, you became the master of that world, and now you're coming back. And that's what the return represents.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with Skylar. I mean, once she realizes the transformation, she offers a lot of resistance, and in a lot of ways, she's much more formidable to Walter White than Gustavo Fring, because unlike Gus, who he can dispatch of without having any sort of challenge to his moral, what's left of his moral center, Skylar represents that thing that he set out from in the beginning of the story to protect. And now that thing is saying, you're not protecting me. You're jeopardizing us all.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I would also point out that as Walt tries to return to the real world, as he's trying to leave that world of crime behind, he's done with the meth empire and everything. He's tempted to call them back in. He calls upon Todd and his Nazi uncle, and so they come out of nowhere. They into this interrupt his return and shake up his entire life, basically destroying his life by calling upon them. So, but that brings us to the change, which is, as I said, Dan calls it often the master of both worlds. And here you have you're stepping back, having changed. with a broader perspective, wiser for your travels. What the protagonist has learned and found in their descent is now what they need to overcome the external or internal threats. Remember that this is the opposite of search. Yes, yeah, it is because the last one was the opposite of go. I think I might have misspoken. So return is the opposite of go. This is the opposite of search. So you remember all those things that the underworld had, the unconscious world had whopped them over the head with, and the lessons they learned. Now they're using those lessons back in their real world in order to save the day. I'm sure the last episode of Breaking Bad probably has an example of this.
Yeah, exactly. And what we see is Walter is confronted with the fact that all of his efforts, he proved that he could live up to his sense of self, his ego. He reclaimed his ego. He accomplished that thing that was sort of the secondary thing that was pushing the whole thing, but really at the expense of the stated goal of protecting his family. His family won't take his help. They won't take his money. And now he's off on the run. He's lost everyone who means something to him. And he is, again, powerless. But he has to scrap together the last bits of that resourcefulness and that will to just dominate, to enact a plan to force his money on his family and to rescue Jesse against all odds.
Mm-hmm. And he learns, he learned this many times before, but I think like what is often said in the final episode that they try to, underscore is that Walter was often very direct with his approaches during his time as Heisenberg. But now that Heisenberg is essentially dead and it's just Walter, or Heisenberg has been integrated into Walter, to where they're the same person. There's no more division. Now Walter takes a much more indirect approach in dealing with his opponents, and that causes them to not see him coming, which causes him to win, or at least enact his plan. So that's essentially the story circle. We're definitely going to be examining it more. In fact, this is probably a cornerstone episode because it's probably going to give us the vocabulary for us and y'all at home to talk through stories, to talk through these concepts moving forward. But I did want to conclude with a few things. First, I do implore you, go and read Dan Harmon's words yourself. He is a master teacher. I've hold the story circle. Like I reread it every time I try to sit down to do a new major project. I just like to refresh myself on his thoughts and to organize my own thoughts. It's motivating, it's educating, it's good for the spirit. And I would suggest that a great story is made up of many circles. It's like a clock filled with gears. A good sequence also has all the elements of the story circle, and a movie is a series of sequences. So you can really get down to the minutia, down to the point of a single scene should probably have a mini circle within it. Circles upon circles is the way I try to think of it. But I do want to exit our introduction with one word of warning. Coming from me, a victim of the search for the perfect structure, this tool is a guideline and not a strict rule. Structure is there to support themes and characters and not the other way around. And writing is not all structural. I like to think of that this is just as important a tool to sew creative ideas together as it is to sew creative ideas into your mind for let them bloom later.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of putting it. I think, that old adage, you have to know the rules to break them.
Yes.
Right. And what that means, it's not super useful as someone who's starting off in their journey creatively, and you turn someone in, they're like, you're not following any of the rules. You have to know the rules to break them. Like, what the fuck does that mean? And I think what it means is it's like when you break a rule, you have to understand why you're doing it and why it's necessary to do it to achieve something specific. If you're just breaking the rule without understanding, it's possible it could work, right? It's more likely it's going to work if you understood what you were deviating from and why.
Yeah. And also, if you're out there, if you're a young filmmaker who's watching this or any sort of storyteller, if you have problems with your story, this is also a good diagnostics. Go put your story through this rigor. Can you sum up your story into all these elements? And if not, there might be that might be your problem.
And two simple exercises that come out of this. Draw two circles two big circles on a piece of paper. Draw one line vertically, one line horizontally. One is character, one is setting, and on one side you write where you describe your character in a list, all their traits at the beginning of the story. On the other side circle at the end of the story, the new world on the setting side, the old world on the setting side.
I like this.
And then that way you can clearly visualize what are going to be those qualities. So as you're doing the blending throughout the journey, you know what character you should be writing and what world you should be writing. And ideally, if you're doing it exactly right, you're thinking about it in terms of crossfading a character. So, if we're again on character, we're saying, okay, old character is at its maximum of its qualities in quadrant 1. In quadrant 2, those qualities are still there, but they're diminished. Now we have new qualities in quadrant 3, rising, and then maximized in quadrant 4. And if you do that, you're going to see yourself get a really good arc. And these sorts of things, especially when you're starting out, really help you know that there's going to be an important change value in your story.
100%. And I think, the big, I don't even have anything to add to that, man. I just love the idea that vertical line is the character, the horizontal line is the world. Perfect. Okay, Secret Keepers, that is it for the Story Circle overview today. When we get back, Danny and I are going to pitch a little game to you featuring all the things we just talked about.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. And as always, we are brought to you by X Seekers of Fortune, the game that we both created. The game is live on Pledge Manager. So that means that you can buy your copy of X Seekers of Fortune through Pledge Manager. The way you would get there is you can go to Kickstarter.com, look up X Seekers of Fortune, and there will be a late pledge button. Click on that and it'll take you to the Pledge Manager where we still have plenty of our bundles available for you. Not only that, but you can also get any and all of the add-ons that we had initially offered during the Kickstarter. So go to Pledge Manager or to Kickstarter, look up X Seekers of Fortune and get your copy today while you can still get a discount on it and you can still guarantee your first edition copy of the game. And what makes the first edition copy special, not only does every card in the Action X deck come with a special first edition logo stamp, but also you are going to receive a first edition booster pack. This pack will contain at least 5 cards that can go into the Action X deck right away to augment your gameplay. These cards may be available in the future, but probably never with these first edition artworks on them again. So go to Kickstarter and late pledge and get your first edition copy of the game. Now, back to the show. All right, Secret Keepers, the moment you've all been waiting for. Can we turn the Story Circle into a game? Now, the game that I'm going to pitch, I mean, we're going to have a more involved game in part 2 that's more like an actual game that you would buy at a store. This game is going to be a game that you can play with yourself, sort of like what Danny suggested in your writing. We're going to take I would suggest you do this at home. Take a movie or a TV show that you love and you know inside and out, sit it down and plot it out on a story circle. Not only that, like say what Danny did with Breaking Bad. Danny was doing the whole of Breaking Bad. I would even suggest take an individual episode of your favorite show. And if it's a good show, you should be able to plot out the story circle on an individual episode basis. So what I told Danny to do before he got here today was to secretly choose a movie that he knows I've seen, and we're going to really quickly plot out the story circle as best we can as quickly as possible.
Perfect.
So what is the movie, Danny?
A Christmas on Mars. No, I'm joking.
Oh.
It's Interstellar.
Interstellar. I could have listened to that. Another person who talked about the story circle. Interstellar is going to be a little complicated, but let's see if we can go through it. Okay.
Okay.
So we have you is obviously Matthew McConaughey, a
former pilot who never quite
Murphy,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, former test pilot.
Is Murphy his daughter?
Oh, Murph is his daughter. You're right. Cooper. So Cooper is, like you said, a former test pilot who, as anybody would, had dreams of maybe being an astronaut one day, but now the world is in a different place where there's not really need for people going to space. At least that's what the world
for whatever
believes.
reason he's not able to have fulfilled his lifelong desire to be a pilot.
So he needs to.
He needs to be a pilot, but he also needs to help his children survive the terrible world that they're in.
It was essentially his need is to protect or to, protect his family, even if that means not being with them.
Right.
So he goes to
space.
Yep. That's the ultimate goal. Talk about that. So I'm just scrolling back up to make sure we hit everything and don't accidentally skip something. So yeah, he goes to space. He crosses the threshold on a rocket ship. And that was such an amazing scene of him driving away from his daughter, Murph, Matthew McConaughey nailing it with that crying. That's something that iconic. They did like that one shot of him driving away in the truck with the tears running down his face. But we're going to be in his, every little piece of media about him when they do a montage. But yeah, he crosses into space where now
he searches
for
a planetary system suitable for life.
Correct. Yeah. And so if I remember correctly, they kind of set it up where he, they have a few choices that they can make. But the search leads to, let's talk about some of the consequences of the search here is the high gravity planet that causes them every hour is like 7 years.
Yeah.
And they go down and they get trapped on it and they realize that what they thought was a positive message being broadcast from the original astronaut who went there was actually just a glitch because their spaceship crashed upon entry. And so they went down and wasted, I forgot how many, it was like 21 years or something like that by the
crazy.
end. An amazing amount of time. And all for nothing. So that is like they thought that they knew what they were doing and they were bonked thoroughly on the head and they lost. Now talk about the other iconic crying scene where he has to go up and watch his kids sending their messages to him over the course of 20 years and just, watching his kids age while it's only 3 hours later for him. That is the old, talk about a road to trials. Now meeting with the goddess. Now here's where, here's where like, I guess we could argue that the next planet they go to is where they find the astronaut played by Matt Damon, who ultimately is actually, he sent a false positive this time because he didn't want to die.
Turns out Jimmy Kimmel was right.
Yeah.
Matt Damon is a
scumbag.
Yeah.
He's such an all-American guy that when they can stunt cast him as a scumbag. But I would argue that's still probably the search. Right, because they're still searching for the planet. They haven't found it. They found Matt Damon, but it was a false positive.
Yeah.
If anything, I would think that the find, it's arguable. Is the find start when he enters the Tesseract?
I would say so.
Okay, I would say that there is a bit of a mini climax that I don't know exactly how to. It might be just that like emotional, like overcoming moment, because I really think that there is something special about when Matt Damon blows the airlock on their main ship and they're in like the it's a detachable like shuttle, right, that they can take down to the planets, but they have a main ship that they have to live on.
You might be able to argue,
because I would say
might be able to argue that that's the find and the take is when he jettisons himself from Anne Hathaway,
something like that, because there's just something to me like that moment where he says like Anne Hathaway, like he has to turn the spaceship at the same velocity that their bigger craft is going. And Anne Hathaway essentially says this is impossible. And he says, no, this is necessary. And he's finding in himself, like pushing himself to his limit. So I whether that be the climax of the search or the beginning of the find. But I do think that he literally goes and meets with the goddess when he finds himself inside a black hole, which turns out to be a Tesseract. Wait, where were we at? So that's 5. So either way, like I said, sometimes it's an emotional thing. So maybe that sequence all the way through from him saving the ship through him going into the black hole is the find. But now he has to take, which is meet your maker. He's inside a Tesseract. He's inside a black hole.
Yeah.
He is looking at his daughter. He's trapped in this prison behind a bookcase where he's a ghost to his daughter. He wants so desperately just to be with her, and he's seeing all these decisions he made to be away from her. So it's like literally watching your life play out before your eyes and seeing all your biggest regrets, right? So that's, I mean, how else could you sum up the Meet Your Maker? But so his way of, I guess, defeating or owning the situation is taking what he's now learned from being inside the Tesseract, this like a place where they can actually run calculations that matter. This is where the movie gets like, timey-wimey, wibbly wobbly, very scientifically accurate up until he goes into the black hole. But essentially, he now has information that he would never have had before, and he finds a way to communicate it to his daughter.
He becomes the ghost that Murph is fixated on at the beginning of the movie.
He becomes the ghost, and he communicates to her through a watch, the watch that he gave her, I believe. And so in a way, he's now, not only was he the master of the real space or regular space in saving the ship and doing all the voyaging that they've done, now he's the master of this unknown space, this truly mythical black hole space that is just magical, to say the least. They also have called it, Return is also called Take Magic Flight. So I think that this is where things, like you said, there's cross-fading going on. A single scene can be both the take and the return. So I think there's a little bit of return in that scene as well. But essentially, I mean, the story actually wraps up pretty, after that acid trip of a moment, the story wraps up pretty conventionally, because he's essentially ejected from the black hole. He's floating in space, and he's found. He's
found and brought back to his daughter,
found and brought back to his daughter. So he returns, but it's also, he's still a ghost to her. She's an old woman, and he's just basically only a few years older than he left. So he basically looks exactly the same.
Can you imagine how crazy that would be? You lose your parent as a child, and then you find them on your deathbed, and they're essentially the same person that left.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Now, I do want to slip in here and say one of my big criticisms. I think Interstellar is a wonderful film. I have a few criticisms of it, though. And one of them is, I do believe, I think it's Ellen Burstyn plays Murph as an old woman. But I think what I talked about earlier with what Dan Harmon said about switching out your characters, it also have to be careful about switching out your actors, because I think that scene didn't quite land. He wanted to cast a real old person instead of making up the younger.
Very Christopher Nolan decision.
He makes some wild ones. But I feel like I disconnected because I needed it to be the same actress. He had 3 different actresses playing the same character. And I think that was just one too many. He needed to take, what is her name?
Jessica Chastain.
Thank you, Jessica Chastain. He needed to take her and do old age makeup.
Fantastic.
She's fantastic. She could have performed that scene. He has the budget to make the old age makeup. And I think it would have emotionally meant more to the audience. I think that I kind of disconnected from the movie after the Tesseract scene.
Yeah, it does. It's this weird thing where I think Nolan pursues this literalism, not to get off topic here, but sometimes storytelling needs to be more symbolic and metaphorical, and I think, to your point, knowing that the soul of the person who we identified as the sufferer of the loss is inside the person we're seeing react to her father coming back means a lot more than this person that we are just now meeting, now trying to create a bond with as a character. We're being told that this character is the same character that we've known throughout the story, and we're not feeling it the same way we would have.
But let's strip away what we saw in the movie theater and just read it on page. Let's just try to do that.
Perfect.
And
great moment.
Change. Yeah,
great moment.
It was a great. He's come back. He's changed. The world has changed. He's not even in the same world that he was in, and ultimately leading him to, as the master of both worlds, journey out on his own, because he has the confidence to go and venture into the unknown and find his what's her face character. Sorry, you just said her name earlier.
Murph?
Not Murph.
Oh, Anne Hathaway's character.
Anne Hathaway's character, which I can't remember her name in the movie. But yeah, he's so...
Catwoman.
But there you see, between the two of us, we were able to lay out the plot. And I would implore you, just go find your favorite movie. Dan Harmon uses Die Hard consistently throughout the story circle thing. So watch Die Hard, then read Dan Harmon's story circle, and you'll get the idea. Anyways... I think that's all we have to say on that game pitch. We actually performed the game in front of you. So when we get back, Danny and I are going to. Oh, not that we don't go away.
We're not coming back. I think we're saying goodbye.
Yeah, I think so. So that is it for today's episode. You can let us know what you thought, and the same way that you can answer the question of the week. So, do you remember how we do those, Danny?
You at us on TikTok, or you get in the YouTube comments, and you do Game of the Week, which is GOW. Let us know. Is that the thing?
GOW or Game of the Week. That'll work.
And just let us know whether you like the Game of the Week this week. Usually we rate these. Since this is a game that we actually played, I would say this is a game that we definitely would say I would actually give it a different rating. Use.
There. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Usually our rating, and I need to get better about saying this, is we either trash it, we shelve it, or we make it. But this time, since it's a game that doesn't need any construction at all and it already exists out there, we just use it. We just introduced you to it, really. Thank you so much, Danny. And I do want to say really quick that, whoops, I got to get better at this. That while you're there, leaving your comments, be sure to like the episode, be sure to subscribe to our show, and be sure to rate and review us wherever you can. We really appreciate it. We should also mention, just here at the end, we do have a Patreon set up. It's still in its infancy, but that means it's free to join for now. So get on it while you can. We're going to start posting some behind the scenes content, I believe, maybe some outtakes from the episode if we really mess up. And our first nearly full episode of the show is up there, which was an episode where I forgot to press record on the microphone. So the audio wasn't that great, but if you really want to hear my thoughts and Danny's thoughts on the state of television, you can go and listen there at patreon.com/Megamoth Studios. That'll do it for today's episode of the Megamoth Studios Super Secret Podcast. I would like to thank my co-host Danny. The really great work with the Breaking Bad analogies. You kept it on point. That was what my script was missing. And I have been Joel, reminding you that you must start somewhere. So why not here? Thanks for watching. Produced and edited by William Wymore. Theme music by James Hilden.